Welcome to Streamers and Punches, the podcast from SoundNotionTV that looks at current events and new releases in the world of film music. My name is Kevin Wilt.
And I'm Bill Witham.
On today's show, we've got a few very quick headlines to mention, and we're going to kind of recap some of the things we've been listening to and seeing over these past few weeks over our Christmas break here, and also kind of do a quick roundup of some of or a very small handful of some of our favorite scores from the past year, from 2011. So just a few things to mention. This was a story that I believe came out today. Kim Novak is crying foul to the use of some of Bernard Herrmann's Vertigo score in the new film The Artist. And I think she was looking at like a DVD sampler thing for the Oscar voting, and heard the Herrmann music and kind of flipped out a bit. Bill, what did you think about this whole idea of Kim Novak being upset that Herrmann's score was used in another film, or I guess it was one of the songs was used in another film?
She mentions in her letter that it's used in the climactic scene of the Artist, and I think one of the most significant things is that this has happened a lot before, so it's not the first time, and it won't be the last that one movie repurposes someone else's composed music and maybe does so wrongly or whatever. But this movie, and for our listeners, you may not know, Kevin, I only found this out recently. The Artist is really a silent film, so it's all performance and facial expression and music. So it's a little more important here to have a movie that's, and I don't know if you know this, but from some of the podcasts I've been listening to, they've been saying this movie, although it's sort of fun and delightful, it's not really that good of a film when you take away the initial concept of it being a new
Silent film.
A new silent film, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Beyond that element, there's not that much about it that makes it stand out. But that it is getting a lot of praise and a lot of talk about it could be a contender for Best Picture and things like that. So it does kind of stand out that, wow, I mean, they had all that going for it, and there's all this Oscar buzz, and then they rip off the music that they use, and so that is the case. But Daniel Schweiger mentioned, I was checking out some of his little bloggings from Facebook. And his point was that there was actually a score written for that scene, so that's what makes it even worse, or sort of compounds the eyebrow raising element to all of this. So anyway, so that's it. So Kim Novak doesn't like it, but she's not the only one, and some people have rushed.
She took on
That's right.
some trade magazines, and I think she also had something in the newspaper or something like that. I don't quite remember.
Yeah,
but yeah.
Her description of it, like saying, "I want to report a rape," I mean, saying it's a piece of art, it's been violated. It's it's a little bit hysterics as far as what's really at stake there. But all the same, I mean, it is important to show she has some feelings of ownership for the original movie she was in by Hitchcock that used Bernard Herrmann's score, and she simply. I think crying foul is the better phrase to go with rather than reporting a rape. But anyway, I'll leave that up to the listeners to determine that, I suppose. Yeah.
All right. We've got a couple of links we're going to put up on our website. This is SoundNotion.tv/SAP. We've got some music and sound behind-the-scenes videos from the new Mission Impossible movie, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, and War Horse. Now, Bill, you were the one that found these videos. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, they're just real quick behind the scenes. They talk to the sound designers for Mission Impossible, and then they talk to a little bit with Michael Giacchino, and of course he brings up the classics theme by Lalo Schifrin and talks about the different ways he was able to incorporate into the score, and when he was able to rely on, when he was allowed rather to use a lot of music in a scene. And then the sound effects guys were talking about how they, it's an action movie, but they tried to balance it by use of sound effects mixed with music. And it's really more of the same with Warhorse. they talk at great length about collecting sounds of horses and the hoofs and the
Yeah.
running in a grassy field and things like that. It's interesting. I mean, it's something like that it could be potentially a very dull topic, but these are one is I think about 13 minutes, and the other one's about 9 minutes, and so they work very well, and you're hearing it directly from the artists who do it, and then there's little comments on the side by Michael Giacchino or a few comments by John Williams. So it's nice to get the composers in there as well. Certainly not a featurette on music, but more about the collective sound. But it's interesting because these are two of the more sort of higher profile films to come out the holiday season, and it's nice to see some of the talent and work that goes into making them.
Sure, sure. One of the bigger pieces of film music news to come out in the past few weeks is it has been announced that the next James Bond movie, Skyfall, will be scored by Thomas Newman instead of David Arnold, who has scored every James Bond movie since I think it was like 1997 or something like that, the past 4 or 5 James Bond movies. I think an interesting turn of events. This was something we talked about a few months ago on the show when it was announced that Sam Mendes was going to be directing the next James Bond movie because so many of his earlier films were scored by Thomas Newman, and we both kind of suggested, hey, would that be possible?
Yeah.
The story is that David Arnold was hired as the music director for the 2012 London Olympics, so he wasn't going to have time to do it. A lot of these kinds of announcements, you read the reasoning of things like that, and it's like, yeah, sure, they just wanted this guy instead of that guy. This one, I'm kind of like, he's got the 2012 London Olympics gig. Yeah, he's probably pretty busy. I'll buy that.
Yeah.
But it's certainly, I think, no surprise that Thomas Newman was hired in his place, given his relationship with Sam Mendes.
Right. Right. And I remember how we talked about how I think David Arnold mentioned some people he wanted to collaborate with,
right,
for the possibility of the opening Bond song, and we were kind of saying, oh yeah, but it'll be interesting because Sam Mendes will direct it, and now it's like, well, no, he's going to direct it, but it's not going to be David Arnold, so it'll be interesting. I remember feeling a little bit of concern when Pixar announced their next movie would not be scored by Randy Newman, but rather Thomas Newman, and I believe that was for Finding Nemo. Yeah. And I remember thinking that should be interesting because his style it lends itself to like adult dramas or kind of a quirky independent movie sensibility.
Right.
And I didn't think it would work for any kind of animation film, let alone a cartoon that's essentially for children. And I like Finding Nemo. It's a very good score, and it's very much Thomas Newman, but maybe with a little more energy to it than, say, Shawshank Redemption. I'm not talking about like lyricism or sort of beauty, but energy. And
right.
And so I have no doubt that he'll, I think he'll definitely step up to the plate for James Bond.
Yeah, it'll really be interesting to see what turns out, because usually when you think of Thomas Newman scores, like you said, it's more subdued and subtle and usually lyrical and more backgroundy, for lack of a better term. And none of those things are what you think of when you think of a James Bond score. It's usually, huge brass section, lots of bombast and energy. I mean, talk about energy in a score. You would think that usually a James Bond movie would even take more musical energy than Finding Nemo. So it'll be interesting to see whether he kind of steps away from what he normally does and give kind of a high energy, bombastic James Bond score, or bring more of this subtle indie film Thomas Newman kind of sound to James Bond. It'll be interesting to see which direction that goes.
Yeah, and ultimately that'll fall on what the direction is that Sam Mendes goes with the film, because that'll determine what approach Thomas Newman takes, and they work well together. And I think he could bring a different feel to the Bond movie, and the score will go along with that. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah. All right, the last little bit of news that we are going to mention today, and this was announced, I think, just within the past day or two. Rocker Mike Patton is set to score the film called The Place Beyond the Pines. Um, Personally, I don't know too much about the film. Bill, you may know a little bit more about it than I do. But certainly another example in what I guess certainly not a new trend, but a trend that is really kind of ramping up in the past 3 or 4 years of having um, pop musicians score films.
Right, right. I was gonna say that this article is either gonna inform you or it's gonna depress you, depending on what your personal likes and dislikes are as our
Mm-hmm.
listeners. This is definitely, yeah, it's sort of the next example of somebody from a popular background who sort of takes the reins for an upcoming film. I will say this is not by any means going to be like a really high profile film. At least that's the impression I get. Uh, Derek Cianfrance, the director, uh, worked on a film called Blue Valentine, and that was sort of known as kind of an indie art house film with an NC-17 rating, and I think it was with Ryan Gosling and I want to say Michelle Williams. Anyway, so he directed that. Now he's moving to this, and he made a comment that he wanted to have a movie with more violence and guns and motorcycles. So this is that movie, and if that sounds appealing to you, then check it out when The Place Beyond the Pines comes out. But yeah, the Mike Patton most famously is from the band Faith No More, and a lot of people will remember them or Mr. Bungle or Phantom Fan, Phantomas. I'm not sure how to pronounce it exactly. That shows you how much I know about his bands. But you may just want to, if you know the name and you're interested with what he can do, you might want to check out the link because when it takes you over to the Slash Film article, it's got 3 links, which are kind of cool because they link to essentially 3 covers that he's done on some album with all film themes. So it's like Rosemary's Baby, Charade, and Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me are 3 themes that he covers. So you might want to listen to his sort of unique take on that. So anyway, yeah.
All right, cool. So our kind of main topic today that we wanted to get to um, has been what are some things that Bill, you and I have been listening to lately. Now, both of us being uh, teachers, we get a nice chunk of time off during Christmas vacation where we get to catch up on a lot of um, the kind of Oscar bait films that come around
Yep.
around Christmas time. Um, a couple that I wanted to mention, I wanted to talk about Hugo with a score by Howard Shore, which we've talked about a little bit, and of course the Michael Giacchino score to the new Mission Impossible movie, as well as Hans Zimmer's score to Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows, which we also talked about, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago. Now, Bill, you've seen all or some of these 3 films that I wanted to mention. Is that right?
Yeah, I've seen all 3.
Okay. Out of those 3, was there, in terms of score, was there one that stood out a little bit?
Uh, let's see. You mean just as far as it being memorable, or?
Yeah, or effectiveness,
Yeah,
or
I liked Hugo quite a bit, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later.
mm-hmm.
I thought the Mission Impossible was, very serviceable, and it kept the theme intact, and it did it in a way that sort of, I don't know. For some reason I remember how Danny Elfman approached it with his first Mission Impossible movie,
Mm-hmm.
and how it seemed like at every chance he had, Danny Elfman had like the trumpets and the brass just as high as they could be, especially as they got into some of the really intense action cues near the end when they're on the train and there's a
Yeah.
helicopter. And I just remember it like no matter how high I thought they were, the theme was then going to modulate higher and they were going to play even higher. And I just remember thinking like, good God, I mean, it almost doesn't sound real. Like, but anyway,
Yeah.
so he used the theme, but definitely like made it a Danny Elfman version of that theme. And I kind of feel like with Giacchino, I don't want to say he honors it more, but it feels a little bit closer to
He preserves it more, maybe.
I want to say it's a little more closer to a Lalo Schifrin kind of approach. He
Okay.
keeps it in 5, I think, as much as possible, and kind of shifting between, regular meters like meters in 2 or 4, and then asymmetrical meters like being in 5 or in 7 for the music. So he moves, shifts it around, moves it around, and I think his action cues are, they're very much Michael Giacchino cues. It's like
Hmm.
something here out of Super 8 or Up or Speed Racer, any of the stuff he's done recently, Star Trek. It's in there. It's the style is his own,
Yeah.
and I still think Giacchino is coming into his own, but every time I feel like he's getting more and more capable and more competent. And so I thought that the Mission Impossible was pretty decent. Yeah.
Yeah, you described it as serviceable, and I think I have to agree with you. It seemed, there's always that kind of rule that, you know, for a score to be successful, you're not supposed to notice it very much.
Right.
And I found myself not noticing it very much, which
Yeah.
I think is probably a good thing. I remember his score to Mission Impossible 3, which was, that was J.J. Abrams' first movie that he directed, I believe. So this was not too, this was still kind of in the middle of Lost, not too long after Alias. And I kept thinking throughout all of Mission Impossible 3 that his score was very TV like. Like he was almost trying to score the movie as if it were the TV show from the 1960s. Very kind of smaller scale and kind of episodic in its treatment. And I thought it didn't work very well, and it didn't help that the movie wasn't very good either. Um, but those problems seem to disappear in this one. And like you said, with each film, he seems like he's getting better and kind of finding his way around a little bit more. And I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah. 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 Definitely. Sure.
Um, Now we talked briefly about Hugo, and we've talked about that score a little bit. I really enjoyed the film. If anything, I thought and it's not something that I think you'd hear me say too often. The music in a lot of places, especially the opening sequence, I thought was maybe given too much prominence. I'm not sure. It may have, and it maybe even comes down to like a mixing thing or something where it's the music is so far out front that you're almost being asked to notice it. Like, okay, here it is now. I mean, overall, I thought it worked well, and it was a very very nice film and everything. Um, that I guess would be my only gripe about the score, is it just seemed to be a little more out front than it needed to be.
Yeah, that could have been part of the aesthetic that Scorsese, he had kind of there was a very classic, there is a very
Yeah,
classic feel, an old fashioned feel to that movie. And if you even just go back 20 or 30 years, in most films, the music is a little more noticeable. So,
yeah, yeah.
and I think he was
And
probably
also,
going for that.
we've talked about that being Scorsese's first 3D film, and Howard Shore had mentioned talking about like the depth of sound as well as the depth of the visuals. So you wonder if maybe playing around with that has something to do with it. I don't know.
It could very well could
Yeah.
be. Yeah.
The last film that I wanted to mention, which I think out of these three was maybe the one I was the most disappointed in, both for the film and for the score, was Hans Zimmer's score to the Sherlock Holmes sequel. A few weeks ago we talked about that video with Hans Zimmer and the whole story of him finding these
The Romanis.
these Romani musicians who are kind of authentic, gypsy musicians, if you will, and
Uh-huh.
how he used them to record a lot of the score and all of this about research and authenticity and all this kind of stuff. And then I was really disappointed because I went and saw the film, and here he has these authentic musicians, and there they are just playing really straightforward, 4/4 time Western music kind of phrases. It's what's the point, I guess, of going to all that trouble to add that authentic color if you're also not going to add more authentic content to support it. It seemed to really fall flat in terms of the whole authenticity kind of thing he was going for.
I think it comes back a little bit to the Bruce Broughton rule that sometimes color is more effective for the music than the harmony or even the melody sometimes. And as far as what the audience listens to and what they recognize. And because I was listening to some of the Sherlock Holmes music from the first film, and my first opinion was my first impression was that a lot of the music, the themes were basically all all reappeared. They were all brought
Yeah.
back,
Yep.
and there's a lot of just really, really, I don't want to say simplistic writing in there, but just some
Kind
real,
of
effect.
generic almost.
Um,
I mean,
but I
it
responding
has
to it
he's got his fiddles and things like that,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
other
And
than that, there's not a whole lot
these
of
like
identity to it.
there's just these like huge like offbeats. It's like one and two and three
Right. Right.
and it's kind of like, well, what's special about that? Well, nothing rhythmically. It's just straight eighth notes. But something about the color and the sound of the trombones and the strings, and something about the way it's been recorded, it really sounds exciting. And it's like that's the sort of Hollywood sound mixing polish that gets put
Mhm.
on it, and it makes it sound so much better than what it actually really is.
Right.
And then I think that the Romani is sort of another layer of that. However, that being said, I don't really I don't really recall when they sort of come in or go out during the film.
Yeah.
So I do like I've ordered it. I haven't had a chance to listen to it, but I do like his approach with a lot of solo instruments, even in the first movie. So I'm going to listen to this sequel
Yeah.
soundtrack and
And
kind of try to get a better idea how the gypsy influence is used in it.
yeah, that was something I did. I enjoyed the score to the first film, and like you said, a lot of the soloistic things, and that kind of thing works just as well in this second film. I guess most of my disappointment comes from all the things that we talked about with trying to get these authentic musicians and then really really underutilizing them. One thing
Yeah,
that I did like about the score to the second film, that he also does a similar thing, which is in the first film. In the first film, there's a scene where the characters are trying to break into Parliament to save the day or whatever,
right.
and there's Big Ben with the clock tower, and he incorporates the Big Ben chime into the underscore, which unless you're paying really close attention, you don't really notice, but it was kind of cool. And then in the second
Oh,
film, there's a scene where the characters are, Professor Moriarty is attending a performance of Mozart's Don Giovanni, and Sherlock Holmes and Watson are trying to chase him down at the opera house, and
yeah,
and and Hans Zimmer incorporates. Well, there are moments when they announce that he's at the opera house, we have to go get him. So before they even get there, Hans Zimmer brings the Mozart Don Giovanni tune into the score, and
right.
then once they get to the
Which I
opera,
did like.
he kind of
Yeah.
does the
I
opposite
like the whole
thing.
sequence. The whole sequence with the opera I thought was pretty cool because it's a sort of a climactic or small climactic moment within the
Right,
film. But I remember the way it gets incorporated, and then you hear Mozart on the top, and then Hans Zimmer percussion,
right, right.
and low.
Once they get to the opera house, you're kind of watching the opera, but it's as if the opera house had the Hans Zimmer orchestra in the pit. So it's
You're
Mozart's
right.
instrument beefed up with all of its Hans Zimmer ness, which is which
Yeah,
is also kind of funny. It's kind of funny, but
it was
it was
kind of
also cool.
it was yeah, but it was cool in the moment. I definitely dug it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Let's see. How about I mention a couple things I've seen?
sure.
Okay, and they at first they're in no particular order, but then I realized they are in a particular order, and I'll explain that in a moment. The first movie that I want to talk about is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Of course, most people are familiar with, if you have seen this or even if you have not, that this is a remake of a Swedish film, which is a film version of the book by Stieg Larsson and the first chapter in his Millennium trilogy. Anyway, so this is now David Fincher's approach or his cover of a movie that already exists. And when I saw it, I was kind of wondering why they bothered to do it at all. It was very similar in a lot of ways, but they did bring some things to it. One of the big differences was the score. It was composed by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, who both collaborated with David Fincher on The Social Network 1 year ago. And I kind of thought that the score was, in some cases, it was effective because it was underscore. And what these two gentlemen have shown they're competent at doing is creating music that you won't remember because it's just supporting the film, and it can't really function outside of that. And now, if that's your job, then and that's all you need to do, and all you have to do, then that's fine. You've done your job. So on one level, they were successful. Um, but on the level of it being memorable or noteworthy for any one reason, I actually found it in a couple scenes annoying and kind of grating. Like, okay, I get it. It's electronic. It's a little bit
It's,
distorted.
it's
It's
textural, ambient. We got it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like trying to sound edgy because otherwise this is a regular mundane conversation. But the
Right.
whole movie is, if you know the story, it's conversation heavy in some cases, or it's got a large sort of sprawling plot line, and there's a lot of dialogue in it. So I'm tuned into that. I don't really care what the music is
Right.
doing
Right.
because there's a lot of scenes with just characters in a room speaking. So they would try to, well, they would try or they would score those scenes, and in some cases it was almost too distorted and it almost came off a little pretentious in some scenes. So
Hmm.
I kind of was annoyed by it, and then other times I thought, well, that was kind of cool, but I don't think that this sort of approach of, oh, listen to this music, it's distorted and it's a little edgy, I don't find it refreshing at this point. I think with Social Network it had a little bit of newness to it or something.
Hmm.
But anyway, so that was my first one. So I would very much describe The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo as, I enjoyed the film, but I wasn't so crazy about the score. The next one, I enjoyed the score quite a bit, but wasn't so crazy about the film. And that was The Adventures of Tintin. But this is not a film review website, so I'm not going to go into all the issues I had with the computer generated movie. But I will say the John Williams score is, it's sort of John Williams just doing what he does very well.
Right.
It's got a lot of resemblance to some Harry Potter, some sort of like the B themes or minor themes in it. It just kind of sounds. It has a very reminiscence of that sound world, but their themes in this are themes for Tintin, and there's very cool kind of jazzy colors, and we played some of the opening theme a few episodes back. So there's a real wealth of energy, of themes, of sort of set pieces to go along with all the action set pieces in the film. I think it's a fun score. It's very colorful, and it's not exactly what you would expect. And I've heard some people say that who've grown up with Tintin that they're not really crazy about the movie score because they grew up with the show and they like that music. But
Hmm.
it's not that show. It's a new movie, and so I say get over it. But anyway, um, okay, so wasn't as crazy about the movie, but I like the score.
Yeah.
Now the third one
Now I
is,
have not seen the film, but I do. I listened to the soundtrack of Tintin,
yeah.
and I agree with everything you say about it. It's we talk all the time about John Williams being the last composer who really writes scores like that. That most people have kind of moved on to the next thing,
Uh-huh.
and so listening to Tintin and Warhorse, these two new John Williams scores, the first two new ones in a long time, it got me thinking of does this music sound dated or stylistically sound dated, and I don't think I listened to either of those scores and left with that impression. But with Tintin, well, actually, I guess with Warhorse as well, I did feel like because especially with Warhorse, it's continually described as classic Spielberg and Spielberg doing what he does best and all this kind of stuff. It kind of felt like John Williams doing a really good John Williams impression. Like he was, especially with Tintin, like he was almost trying to write the type of score he would have written in like the early '90s, but hasn't really written a score like that lately.
I
I
mean,
don't know.
it
I
is
was
and it isn't.
wondering if you had any sort of a similar reaction.
I kind of think ever since like episode one, he's been doing themes, but um, Star Wars episode one, that is. I think he's been doing he's been kind of approaching his scores, and these are whether it's Star Wars and those three prequels, or the Harry Potter movies, or I'm trying to think what else he's done. The Indiana Jones, the Crystal
Hmm.
Skull. He's had themes. The themes have been maybe not as memorable, not as singable, or anything like that. That doesn't necessarily, demerit them or anything like that.
Right, right.
For example, with each new Harry Potter film that he scored, there were many more themes and melodic ideas for the characters that he came up with. So, he's more than capable of delivering what the film needs in its musical score. But I think, I mean, there's been some speculation that maybe he just doesn't have, maybe just the ideas aren't there or anything like that. I don't know. I've heard it a couple times. I've seen the film. It works. There are themes there, and I think by the end of the film, that if you want to sing along, you can because you've heard them enough times. But when I listen to the score alone, it's fun. I mean, I had more
Yeah.
fun just listening to it than I did watching the movie. So, it does conjure up a similar feeling in a couple spots as Harry Potter. But then again, it's John Williams. So if John Williams relies on certain rhythms or certain
Hmm.
devices within the orchestra, it's John Williams. So it might sound like John Williams from 20 years ago. It could, because it's got those adventurous elements, and sort of a romantic sensibility to it. So that's okay. I mean, that happens. One symphony by
Sure,
Tchaikovsky will have similarities to another symphony by Tchaikovsky. It's bound to happen.
sure.
Um, let's see. Oh, I want to finish up, or I would like to finish up with the things I've been listening to lately. If the first film I liked but didn't care for the score, the second film I liked the score and not so much the movie. The third one, I thought the film was pretty good, and the score was really an interesting choice and an odd execution in some ways. Um, but it was really memorable, and that's a movie called Hannah, and that movie is now out on DVD, Blu-ray. Netflix has it; you can rent it. Anyway, I won't go into the movie. It's just basically a young girl that is trained to be kind of like, you're not sure at first, like a hitman or hit woman or hit girl, I guess in this case, or CIA. You're not exactly sure what she's trained for, but she's being trained, and everything she's being trained in is deadly, and she's being trained by Eric Bana, and you're not exactly sure what's going to go on, but it's a pretty good suspense thriller film. And the Chemical Brothers were brought in to provide the score. And I don't really know a lot about the Chemical Brothers. My gut feeling was that they were sort of like a Daft Punk duo of electronic music composers or whatnot. But anyway, maybe some of our listeners can clue me in, or maybe I can just go check out Google when the show's over. But the point is that they have a mostly electronic score, and yes, you do notice it while you watch the film. But I kind of thought it was cool. I thought, this is unique. It stands out, but this movie is not exactly a normal movie, and so the score is not exactly a normal score, and it does stand out, and it does have a theme in it that is kind of almost childlike, but with a kind of a weird sense of humor to it. And then several characters throughout the film whistle that theme. So it's a little odd, especially when you see which characters are whistling the theme at which times in the film. And so it's very strange, but it was memorable. And I heard a little bit of the score recently again, and thought to myself, yeah, it is memorable, especially compared to most of what we hear these days. It certainly isn't generic in that sense. Um, but anyway, so Hannah I thought was pretty cool, and it definitely gets points for just being different and original. So that's Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Adventures of Tintin, and Hannah are some things that I've been listening to lately.
All right, cool. We've got a bunch of new CD releases we wanted to mention. Most of these are either re-releases of old scores or perhaps first-time releases of old scores, but they're all old scores. Bill, why don't you go through this list and tell us about some of these releases? We've got some of them are available at screenarchives.com, others at buysoundtracks with an X.com. Bill, go ahead.
Yes, yes. I think I might have mentioned the Conan the Destroyer in one of our previous episodes. I can't remember if I did, but if I did not, then consider this the first mention. I did actually order it. I have a guilty pleasure when it comes to the Conan movies, at least their scores anyway. Um, they're very operatic scores, and I do love them. The first one, has a special place in my heart. The second one, not so much until now. So I purchased the Conan the Destroyer score. It's on 2 CD, and it's got Nick Rain with the City of Prague Philharmonic Orchestra and chorus, and they're conducting. He's conducting them performing Basil Polidorus' full score, expanded, and I believe it's in complete form, never before released like this. And the performance is fantastic. And I had a couple issues with the way they did Conan the Barbarian, but whatever. It's water under the bridge. This is a really good CD, and if you enjoy the music from those scores, and it's really good. It's just a really fun listen, especially if you like large brassy themes for heroes that wore sandals and carried swords, as they often call that the sword and sandal type of genre these days. So it's a lot of fun. I enjoy the album quite a bit. Anyway, just a quick mention: "Frantic" by Ennio Morricone has recently been released. If you like all the Star Trek scores but want them in their complete form, Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, composed by Leonard Rosenman, has just been released in a complete form. The Sand Pebbles and The Great Train Robbery, both classic scores by Jerry Goldsmith, and quite a bit of fun. Well, The Great Train Robbery is fun. Sand Pebbles is sort of how to score classic drama 101 by Goldsmith. Both are out now in a 2 CD format. Wolfen is an early film by James Horner. It's like right around the sort of, I want to say it's near Battle Beyond the Stars and Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan and Brainstorm, but it's one of his early works, and you can pick that up. The Wrong Box, I just want to mention, even though it's rare, is that it's by John Barry. So if you're a big John Barry fan, The Wrong Box is a rare score of his that just came out. And then, of course, Batman Forever in a complete, expanded, and remastered 2 CD version, which, of course, is composed by Elliot Goldenthal. That is now out as well. So pick those up if you are interested.
All right, very cool.
No. All right.
So that's going to do it for this episode of Streamers and Punches. Now, normally in many episodes past, we have ended with our If You Like This segment, which, as we've explained many times, we play an example from a film score of usually one that I think most of our listeners would be familiar with, and we compare it to oftentimes a piece of concert music that is similar in orchestration or texture or something like that. And we present them to you separately. But today, there has been a link to a YouTube video kind of floating around the internet that does a similar thing that we do not put together. Someone else put this together, comparing part of Hans Zimmer's score or Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard, but it was the part of the score written by Hans Zimmer from The Dark Knight, comparing it to a musical written in 1983. So instead of giving you the separate components that we normally would, we're just going to end today's show by playing the video for you so you can check it out. And the similarities between the two are quite eerie. And very, very apparent. So that's going to do it for today's episode of Streamers and Punches. You can listen to our show on SoundNotion.tv/SAP, where you can subscribe, leave comments, find the links for a lot of things we've been talking about tonight. You can also subscribe to our show through the iTunes store. Until next time, my name is Kevin Wilt.
And I'm Bill Witham.
Thanks for listening.